Okay, picture this. The richest man in the world wants to literally buy up a 75-mile stretch of the Tennessee River. Why? To build his own private utopian megacity from scratch. Sounds crazy, right? Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most audacious and frankly forgotten real estate fever dreams in American history. It's known as the Shoals Mirage. We're going to unpack the wild speculative frenzy that followed Henry Ford's announcement, the massive political showdown it triggered, and how this whole grand vision totally collapsed into ghost subdivisions.
So our story actually kicks off with the colossal infrastructure of war. Back in 1918, right in the thick of World War I, President Woodrow Wilson greenlit the massive Wilson Dam and nitrate plants down in Alabama to pump out munitions. I mean, we're talking over 18,000 workers flooding into the area. But then the war ended, and this massive $50 million government mega project was just left sitting there, half finished and totally idle. The feds were sitting on a huge sunk cost, and they were desperate, like truly desperate, for private sector investment. And that's exactly when the era's twin wizards stepped into the picture. Auto pioneer Henry Ford and his good buddy, the legendary inventor Thomas Edison. Now, Ford wasn't just scouting out a spot for a new factory. The guy wanted to engineer an entirely new society. In 1921, he swooped in with an offer to lease the dam and the plants for 100 years. He made this incredibly bold promise, saying, "I will employ 1 million workers at Muscle Shoals, and I will build a city 75 miles long." 1 million workers. Ford envisioned this decentralized, electrified utopia where his factory workers would actually split their time between the assembly line and their own small farms. It was this highly romantic notion of agrarian America, but juiced up by modern tech. Basically, a self-sustaining community completely shielded from the wild, unpredictable forces of market capitalism. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our agenda for the explainer today. We'll start with a city that never was, move into the speculative gold rush, examine the clash of private wealth vs. public welfare, explore the ghost town collapse, compare failed utopias, and finally, look at the public power solution. Section 1, a city that never was. You know, Henry Ford actually had a really deep distrust of dense, crowded cities. He genuinely believed his own personal Midwestern values should dictate exactly how people live together. And his master plan, which was literally mapped out in Scientific American back in 1922, showed exactly how he planned to enforce that. He wanted to blend rural farm life with urban convenience, creating this sprawling urban ribbon right along the river. The idea was that a worker would spend their off hours tending a personal farm, using dirt-cheap nitrate fertilizer from the local plants, and sharing collective farm equipment that the factory loaned out. Farm and factory working hand in glove, perfectly ordered to fit Ford's incredibly paternalistic vision of the world. Section 2, the speculative gold rush. While just the mere announcement of Ford's plan sparked an absolute firestorm. I mean, look at these vintage newspaper headlines. They were fueling the hype big time, literally branding Muscle Shoals the new Detroit and comparing the frenzy directly to the Klondike gold rush. This was an economic boom built 100% on the magic of Henry Ford's name. Everyday investors all over the U.S. were reading these ads and just pouring their life savings into the region. Property was changing hands almost hourly, with land values skyrocketing day by day, all because everyone was anticipating that massive influx of 1 million workers Ford had promised. But, as you might guess, this boom had a really dark, predatory underbelly. Shady speculators bought up massive cotton fields and aggressively chopped them up into these tiny, 25-foot-wide lots. And the sales tactics? Totally ruthless. High-pressure salesmen used Ford's name as the ultimate bait to ensnare working-class folks. People panicked. They bought lots sight unseen because they were absolutely terrified of missing out on the next great American metropolis. It got so crazy that even local farmers started needlessly planting these huge orchards and truck farms, desperate to feed a phantom population that, well, hadn't even arrived yet. Section 3, private wealth versus public welfare. So, while all these speculators are busy peddling imaginary lots down in Alabama, a massive ideological showdown is brewing up in Washington over who actually controls the Tennessee River. On one side, you have Ford's completely private vision. He was offering just $5 million for a 100-year lease, and get this, he even controversially suggested the government should just print a new fiat currency backed by the dam itself to fund the rest of the construction. But on the other side, you have Senator George Norris. And Norris held this immovable, rock-solid belief in public ownership. He fiercely warned that handing over precious natural resources to a private monopoly without any restriction or regulation was a direct threat to the common good. Senator Norris ended up being the ultimate roadblock here. He successfully stalled out the Ford proposal in the Senate. To Norris, it was simply unconscionable to hand over a massive public infrastructure project, one that taxpayers had already sunk $50 million into,
for a measly $5 million bid from the richest man on Earth. When it came down to it, public oversight and a steadfast commitment to public welfare absolutely refused to yield to Ford's immense private wealth. Section 4. The Ghost Town Collapse. Ultimately, frustrated by the political deadlock, intense congressional scrutiny, and just endless delays, Henry Ford finally threw in the towel and withdrew his bid in 1924. And just like that, the Mirage evaporated. But we have to ask, what happens when a Mirage fades? Think about the devastating financial and psychological toll on the locals who had bet literally everything on this boom. The collapse didn't just ruin the greedy developers, it severely damaged the local residents' long-term trust in outsiders and grand economic promises. Put yourself in their shoes for a second. Imagine being a local teacher or a day laborer watching this crash firsthand. The Better Business Bureau actually documented how these working-class citizens were aggressively targeted and completely duped. They were left totally financially ruined, holding on to completely worthless land that had been artificially pumped up to just absurd prices. We are talking about lots assessed by the tax collector at $40, being sold to unsuspecting buyers for an unbelievable $7,500. It's tragic. If you were to take a walk through that area in the years following the bust, you'd experience this eerie, documentary-style landscape of ruin. You would literally see the ghost infrastructure left behind from the frenzy. Dead-end concrete sidewalks extending out into totally overgrown woods. Abandoned fire hydrants standing awkwardly out in the middle of cow pastures, and sewer lines just buried beneath fallow fields. These were the crumbling monuments to a shattered dream. It was the exact opposite of Ford's polished blueprints, just slowly decaying away in the harsh Alabama humidity. Section 5. Comparing failed utopias. Now, as an historian looking at 20th century corporate expansionism, I have to point out that Muscle Shoals wasn't an isolated failure for Henry Ford. We really have to compare this to Fordlandia down in Brazil to spot his common leadership mistakes. In Alabama, his rigid Midwestern values crashed headfirst into public oversight, leaving behind a bunch of crumbling concrete. In Brazil, his attempt to build this rubber plantation utopia failed because those exact same inflexible values, which were enforced by pretty careless managers, clashed with the wild, unpredictable Amazon. Vines and dense jungle canopy literally suffocated his pristine factories. In both of these cases, Ford's hubris totally blinded him to the local realities, leaving his grand corporate utopias entirely consumed by the surrounding wilderness. Section 6. The Public Power Solution. But hey, the story of the Tennessee River Valley doesn't end in ruin. 9 years after Ford withdrew his bid, the federal government stepped back in. Under President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in 1933, Congress created the Tennessee Valley Authority, or the TVA. The TVA took over the Wilson Dam and went on to build many, many others. But instead of chasing private profit, their goal was managing the river's resources for the common good, controlling massive floods, stopping soil erosion, and generating public power. And the economic success, it was absolutely immense. Before the TVA came along, private power companies were buying wholesale electricity from the government for a fraction of a cent, and then just gouging their retail customers at 10 cents a pop. The TVA stepped in and standardized public power rates to be significantly lower than the national average. This made electricity accessible to struggling rural homes that had literally never had power before. It finally fulfilled the promise of a modernized, electrified valley. And the TVA went way beyond just stringing up power lines. They successfully rolled out massive public health initiatives, like totally eradicating malaria-carrying mosquitoes around the new reservoirs. They developed advanced fertilizers to help out the local farmers, and they even restocked wildlife. They completely transformed the region's standard of living, and they did it without sacrificing the local ecosystem to unchecked private monopolies. So what does this all mean for us today? Well, the tension between government oversight and the massive ambitions of private corporations is just as relevant now as it was in the 1920s. The next time a tech billionaire or a modern urban developer promises to build a shiny new utopian megacity right from scratch, we have to ask ourselves, are they actually building a sustainable community for the public welfare, or are they just selling us another Muscle Shoals Mirage? That's a history lesson we absolutely cannot afford to forget.